All right, sports fans, how's everyone out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. The end of a disappointing season is here for the Philadelphia Eagles as last night's 32 to 9 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers capped off what was a terrible second half of the season for the Eagles, who, after beginning this season with a record of 10-1, would go on to lose six out of their last seven. Now, throughout the season, especially the first half of the season, I tried to give the Eagles a benefit of the doubt, saying that they were winning games, but they had just not played their best football yet. However, that just caught up to them during the second half of the season, and you could see it spilling out onto the field as there was a lot of turmoil within this team. And honestly, to the Arizona Cardinals on New Year's Eve, they were done, but they just didn't know it as of yet. And then they followed that up with a lackluster trip up the turnpike to take on the Giants at MetLife Stadium. And honestly, if that was the effort that the Eagles were going to give, they should have just stayed home and just not even have made the trip up to the Meadowlands. And then last night against the Bucks, instead of going to Tampa, I think the Eagles would have just been better served just going to Cancun because you could see that this team had checked out. You look at it; it's one thing to lose in any sport, but effort can tell a lot about a team. And I want to start with the tackling last night. The tackling for this Eagles team, especially in the secondary, was horrendous. And I don't care who you are and who you're facing. You're not going to beat a lot of teams with that type of effort that they gave, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I've talked about this before. You cannot be a bad defensive team and then all of a sudden think, you know what, we could turn on a switch and get it going when the postseason rolls around. Just for the last three games that the Eagles have played, okay, they had Kyler Murray looking like Kyler Murray pre-knee injury in that contest. Then you go back to the regular season finale against the Giants. Saquon Barkley was looking like the Saquon Barkley that he was at Penn State. And Tyrod Taylor was looking like the Michael Vick from the Atlanta Falcons. And then last night with Baker Mayfield took it back and he looked like the Baker that we saw tearing it up at Oklahoma when he was on his way to winning the Heisman. Now, defensively, this year, the Eagles were near the bottom of the NFL in points allowed per game, yards per game, and opponents' third down conversion percentage, as Philly opponents were darn near completing 50% of their third down conversions against this defense. And I talked about this earlier this season. When you can't get off the field, that means you're going to lose a time of possession battle. That means your defense is out there longer than they really need to be. And it shows up. And to give you an idea of how bad things have gotten defensively for Philadelphia, they just gave up 32 points last night, technically 30 because I know that the Bucks got the safety, but nonetheless, they gave up all of those points, 426 yards of total offense as well to a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that just last Sunday against the Carolina Panthers, the two-win Carolina Panthers only got 228 total yards and only managed to score three field goals. So as bad as it was last night for Philadelphia, it actually could have been worse because those Bucks receivers in the first half dropped several touchdown passes from Baker Mayfield. And then on top of that, to counter that, the Philly offense wasn't that much better either. They were 0 of 9 on third down, 0 of 2 on fourth down. And then when it looked like they had an opportunity to get back into the game because towards the end of the second quarter, going into the beginning of the third quarter, the Eagles' defense did show some life with their front four. It was 16-9, and then the game changed completely in that third quarter, late in that third quarter, when the Eagles were deep in their own territory, and the Bucks did this with a four-man rush. That was it. They dropped all of their backers, they dropped all of their defensive backs, and they rushed four. They kept Jalen Hurts in that pocket. He couldn't get that ball away. He tried to in the end zone, and then of course it resulted in a safety to make it 18-9. And at that point, the floodgates had just opened up. Why? Because right after that, the Bucks got the ball back, and Baker Mayfield connected with Trey Palmer, and it was basically Trey Palmer's legs and the lack of tackling from James Bradbury that resulted in a 56-yard touchdown for Tampa. And then, of course, at that point, it was all over but the shouting as the Bucks are going to cruise to the 32-9 victory. I talked about a Super Bowl hangover for the Philadelphia Eagles before, and I'll bring it up again. This team, especially on defense, they have not been right since the Super Bowl. And I know that they lost both of their coordinators from last year's team. But you just look at it. Last year, basically with the same team, the Eagles had 70 sacks. This year, they only had 43. And that's a big difference because that pass rush was able to make things so much better for that secondary because when you've got guys who can rush the passer like the Eagles were doing last year, quarterbacks getting the ball out quicker. That makes life easier for your DBs back there. Now your front four is not getting to the quarterback as quick, and these DBs we're seeing can't cover. And again, I go back to the Super Bowl because in that game the Eagles could not get to Patrick Mahomes on one leg. And they just have not been the same ever since then. I know that they changed defensive coordinators. They lost both of their coordinators from last year's team, both Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon. But nonetheless, you bring in Sean Desai and you bring him from outside of the team. And typically, you'd want to promote from within to try to keep the same scheme going. The Eagles didn't do that. They brought in Sean Desai, and then you demote him in the middle of the season for Matt Patricia. And of course, Matt Patricia to me is a disaster waiting to happen. Typically, with a lot of the ex Bill Belichick head coaches, it doesn't work out for them in other stops because they try to go out there too much to be Belichick. We saw the train wreck that it was when Matt Patricia was the head coach of the Detroit Lions. And I think some of that has filtered over to his time working with this Eagles defense. Everybody's not on the same page. And you can clearly see that in the results. And you could also clearly see that in the effort that has been given. To me, you look at it defensively, when you're not able to get after that quarterback, that's an issue. And then on top of that, the tackling, because you just look at it, each of the Bucks touchdowns last night, their receivers were just doing whatever they wanted. They just sliced through this Philly secondary. And again, I can't harp on this enough. Where was the effort? There's so much turmoil. You could see it with this team right now. And of course, a lot of people are going to ask, did this team quit on Nick Sirianni? And I'm here to say yes. I mean, there are some people that are going to question whether or not Nick Sirianni will even be back next year as the Eagles head coach. And that would be very interesting because you figure Sirianni, in his 3 years as the Eagles head coach, never had a losing season, got this team to the playoffs 3 times. But, we know that Eagles team owner, Jeffrey Lurie, is not afraid to get off of a head coach in spite of success. He did it with Andy Reid. He did it with Doug Peterson. He could possibly do it with Nick Sirianni. We got to wait and see. Now, I'm not sure if the Eagles will move on from Nick Sirianni, but nonetheless, we know that there will be some changes to this team going forward. Jason Kelsey has basically announced his retirement, and you could see the writing on the wall. I mean, this guy, he's a Philly legend. He played for this team for 13 years, the only team that he's known. And there's some other veterans on both the offensive line and defensive line that could be walking away soon. Fletcher Cox, how much more does he have in the tank? And he's been an anchor on that Philly defensive line for so many years. You look at Lane Johnson, another anchor as well. And I think the Eagles, regardless of who's coaching this team, assistant coaches, whatever, they've got to get back into their bread and butter. And the Eagles' bread and butter has been their line play. You go back to when they won the Super Bowl in 2017. It was all about their O line. It was all about their defensive line. And you go back to last year's team that got to the Super Bowl. That offensive line they were like a well-oiled machine as far as the holes that they were opening up for these Eagle running backs, the protection that they were giving quarterback Jalen Hurts, and then of course the pressure that was created from that defensive line as well. And I think Philly definitely has to get back to the basics. You look at Jalen Hurts. I know that he had the finger injury against the Giants last week, and of course there was going to be some carryover for that because you can't dislocate a finger, break a finger, sprain fingers, whatever. And of course, that was a dislocation in his part, and expect to go out there and still be able to properly grip that football. That's a tall task to ask of anybody. Devonta Smith came to play last night. He was trying to will this Eagles team to a victory, but of course, he lost his tag team partner the week before in AJ Brown, and it made life tougher on him because he was going to see more coverage. But you could clearly see everybody wasn't on the same page. Frustrations with Dallas Goddard and Jalen Hurts, you name it, you can just go right down the list. And I think this is a bitter disappointment to what began as such a promising year for the Philadelphia Eagles. If you go back and study history, this reminds me a lot of the 1981 Eagles. Of course, we saw the Eagles in 1980 get to the Super Bowl, have a legit chance of winning, and they fell short against the Oakland Raiders. Started off strong the following year, only to collapse over the second half, got to the playoffs, and were eliminated at home in the wild card round, courtesy of the New York Football Giants. This time around, Philly got off to that 10-1 start. They got punched in the mouth, courtesy of the San Francisco 49ers, followed it up with another bad outing against the Dallas Cowboys, showed a lot of life and grit against the Seattle Seahawks, but they could not close the door defensively. And then, of course, the last 3 weeks, 2 games with the Giants and then one with the Cardinals. And the thing is, the one game that the Eagles actually did win during this stretch, you could make a very strong and compelling case that they really should have lost that game. And then, of course, 2 weeks later in the rematch with the Giants definitely made them pay. So I'm looking at it like this. I think, Jalen Hurts, I think he might have been more hurt than they're saying, not just with his finger, but his knee. The cohesiveness with this offense was not there. This cohesiveness with this team in general just was not there. Something has definitely got to change in Philadelphia. What's going to happen with the coordinators? What's going to happen with the head coach? What key players are going to, not be there next season? There's a lot that has to be, unwrapped for this Philadelphia Eagles team. But nonetheless, an embarrassing end to what was a strong season to begin with for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think changes definitely will be made. How much we have to wait and see, but nonetheless, a bad ending for the Philadelphia Eagles. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'd be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.